The air was thick with fear. The people of Odon Kingdom walked with their heads down, their voices hushed, their hearts filled with dread. No one dared to smile, no one dared to speak freely, because their king, Jagun the Terrible, had ears everywhere. King Jagun ruled with an iron fist. He taxed the people until they had nothing left. If a man failed to pay, his family was thrown out of their home. If a woman spoke against him, she was taken to the palace and never seen again. But the worst was what happened in the palace dungeon. Every full moon, Jagun ordered his guards to bring 10 people from the village, men, women, and children. They were accused of crimes they did not commit, and before the people of Odon, he would have them beaten, locked in dark prison, or even worse, executed. One night, he stood before his trembling people, his long red robes dragging across the stone floor. His golden crown sat on his head, but his eyes were cold and cruel. "You are my people," he said, his voice deep and mocking. "Your life belonged to me. I decide who eats, who sleeps, and who lives." The people bowed their heads, too afraid to protest. But in the crowd, an old woman with gray hair and sunken eyes did not kneel. She lifted her head and looked straight at the king. "Jagun," she said in a weak, raspy voice, "you have ruled with wickedness for too long. The spirits of the land are watching you." The crowd gasped. The guards moved towards her, but Jagun raised a hand, stopping them. "You dare challenge me?" he asked, amused. The old woman smiled, her face wrinkled with wisdom. "The tree that stands tall will one day fall, and the ground will swallow it whole." Jagun laughed, his voice echoing through the village square. "Let the ground try. I am King Jagun. No one can defeat me." That night, King Jagun sat in his palace, drinking from his golden goblet, celebrating another day of power. His guards stood by his side, watching as he devoured roasted meats and rich wines. He was untouchable, or so he thought. Outside the palace, the old woman from the village walked through the dark streets. She clutched a small calabash in her hands, whispering in the winds. "The gods have seen the wickedness," she murmured. "Let justice come." As she spoke, a strong wind howled through the kingdom. The trees bent, the houses shook, and the air grew heavy. The people woke from their sleep, sensing something was not right. Inside the palace, King Jagun felt a sharp pain in his chest. He gasped, dropping his goblet. His heart pounded, and sweat poured down on his face. "What's happening?" he growled, clutching his throne. The old woman's voice rang through the air, though no one could see her. "Jagun, you will know hunger, you will know fear, you will know pain. Your own hands will bring about your downfall." The king's eyes widened. He screamed for his guards, but as they rushed to his side, his vision blurred, then darkness. The next morning, the people of Odon woke up to a strange sight. The palace gates were open, the guards were confused, but the most shocking thing, King Jagun was missing. His throne sat empty, his crown lay on the floor, his voice, once loud and terrible, was gone. The people whispered among themselves. Some believed the gods had taken him away. Others feared he would return even more crueler than before. Days passed, then weeks, then months. Still, there was no sign of Jagun. The village, once filled with suffering, slowly started to breathe again. But what they did not know was that their wicked king was still alive, very much alive. Jagun opened his eyes to darkness. The air smelled damp, and the ground beneath him was cold and hard. He groaned, trying to sit up, but his body ached as if he had been beaten. He looked around. He was no longer in his palace. The gold, the fine wines, the servants, they were all gone. Instead, he was surrounded by thick trees, their twisted branches reaching towards the sky. The sounds of strange animals echoed in the distance. His heart pounded. Where am I? He struggled to his feet, his red robes now torn and dirty. His crown was missing. He touched his head and realized something terrifying. He was no longer a king. A cold wind blew through the village, carrying a whisper. You will know hunger, you will know fear, you will know pain. The old woman's voice. He clenched his fist. No, I am King Jagun. I am the ruler of Odon. But the forest did not care for kings. A sharp pain shot through his stomach. Hunger? He had never known true hunger before. Food had always been brought to him, but now he had nothing. No servants, no guards, no power. He staggered forward, searching for a way out. But the trees seemed endless. His legs grew weak, his vision blurred. He had spent years making his people suffer, never knowing what it felt like to starve. Now, the gods were making him feel it. The night came quickly, and with it, the growls of unseen creatures. Eyes glowed in the dark. Jagun's body trembled, but not from cold, but from something new, fear. For the first time in his life, King Jagun was afraid. He fell to the ground, his chest heaving. I am King Jagun, he whispered, but even his own voice was weak. The forest did not answer him. The darkness swallowed him whole, and deep in the village, the people of Odon slept peacefully, unaware that the man who had once ruled them with cruelty was now fighting for his own life. Morning came, but it brought no relief. Jagun had barely slept. The forest was alive with strange sounds, chirping, rustling, distant howls. His stomach growled, the pain sharp and relentless. He had never gone a full day without food. Now his body screamed for it. He stumbled through the trees, his once powerful legs now weak. He had no idea where he was going, but he knew one thing: he needed to get out. Hours passed. His mouth was dry. His tongue felt heavy. Then he heard it, the sound of rushing water. A river. Jagun moved as fast as he could, falling to his knees by the water's edge. He cupped his hands, drank greedily, the cold water easing the fire in his throat. But as he sat there, he caught his reflection in the water, and what he saw made his blood run cold. His face was thin, his once proud beard tangled and dirty. His fine robes were ripped. His eyes, once sharp and full of life and power, were now hollow. He looked like a beggar. No, he whispered, this is not me. But it was, and then laughter. Jagun's head snapped up. Across the river, a group of travelers sat roasting meat over a fire. The smell filled the air, making his hunger unbearable. His pride told him not to beg, but his stomach had no pride. Slowly, he stood and crossed the shallow part of the river. He approached the travelers, his hands shaking. Please. His voice was hoarse. I need food. The travelers looked up. One of them, a young man with kind eyes, tossed him a piece of roasted yam. Here, old man. Jagun's hands trembled as he grabbed it. He bit into it, barely chewing it. And then another voice. Wait a minute, one of the travelers said, his eyes narrowing. I know you. Jagun froze. The traveler stood up. You are King Jagun. The traveler laughed a mocking laugh. So the mighty king is now a beggar. One sneered. Where are your guards, your majesty? Where is your golden throne? Jagun's face burned with shame. He had ruled with cruelty, making his people suffer. Now the gods are taking everything from him. And the worst part, this was just the beginning. Jagun left the travelers behind, their laughter still ringing in his ears. He walked for hours, his heart heavy with shame. He had spent years making his people suffer, and now the gods were making him feel every bit of the pain he had caused. He had no kingdom, no servants, no food, no power, and worst of all, no one feared him anymore. He walked. He saw a small village in the distance. Hope flickered in his chest. Maybe he could find shelter. Maybe somebody would help him. But as he got closer, something else filled his chest. Dread. This was not just any village. It was Odon, his kingdom. Jagun stopped in his tracks. He could not go back. If the people saw him like this, they would mark him, or worse, they would remember what he had done to them. He turned to leave, but it was too late. A woman carrying a basket of yams looked up, her eyes widened in shock. Others followed her gaze. One by one, the villagers stopped what they were doing. A hush fell over the crowd, and then someone whispered, It's him! A murmur spread through the crowd. Faces twisted with recognition, some with shock, some with hatred. Jagun felt his chest tighten. He had ruled these people with cruelty. Now he stood before them as nothing. A child pointed at him. That's the wicked king. The crowd stared. Whispered turned to shouts. Jagun took a step back. Then a stone flew through the air, hitting square in his chest. He gasped, stumbling. Another stone, then another. Get out of our village, someone shouted. You made us suffer, another yelled. Jagun turned and ran. He did not look back. He ran until his legs gave out. He collapsed by the side of the road, gasping for air. And for the first time, King Jagun wept. He had once ruled with power and cruelty. Now, he was nothing but a haunted man, and the worst was yet to come. Jagun sat in the dust, his body weak, his heart heavier than it had ever been. The bruises from the stone thrown at him burned, but what hurt him most was the truth. He had no home, no people, and no power. He had spent years making his people fear him, and now they wanted nothing more than to see him suffer. Tears streamed down his face. He had never cried before, not even when he lost his parents as a boy, not even when he fought in battles. But now, alone and defeated, he wept. For the first time, he thought of the people he had hurt, the farmers he had taxed until they starved, the mothers who begged for mercy but found none, the children who watched their fathers dragged away to the dungeons. He had been cruel, he had been heartless, and now The gods had given him what he deserved. A shadow fell over him. Jagun looked up to see a hooded figure standing before him. The person bent down and placed a small bowl of food beside him. Jagun's stomach growled at the smell of fresh yam porridge, but he hesitated. Who, who are you? He asked, his voice weak. The figure lowered the hood. Jagun's breath caught in his throat. It was the old woman, the same one who had warned him of his downfall. She looked at him, her eyes filled with something he did not expect: pity. Eat, she simply said. Jagun's pride told him to refuse, but his hunger was stronger. He picked up the bowl and ate greedily, not caring if the porridge burned his tongue. The old woman sat beside him for a long time. She said nothing. Then she spoke. You were not always like this, she murmured. Once you were a boy. Once you had a heart. Jagun swallowed hard. I lost my heart, he admitted. The old woman nodded. And now the gods have made you feel what it's like to have nothing. Jagun looked down at his empty hands. What do I do now? He whispered. The old woman stood, her face unreadable. This is for you to decide, she said. Then, without another word, she walked away, leaving Jagun alone with his regrets. Jagun did not know how long he sat there, staring at the empty bowls in his hand. He had spent his whole life taking from others, and now he had nothing left to take. For the first time, he understood what it felt like to be powerless. The old woman's voice echoed in his mind. This is for you to decide. He could continue wandering like a beggar, hiding from the people he once ruled, or he could try to make things right. The thought terrified him. The people of Odon hated him. Could he ever undo the pain he had caused? But deep down, he knew he had to try. And so, for the first time in his life, King Jagun humbled himself. He walked from village to village, looking for work. No one recognized him at first. To them, he was just another beggar, another lost soul. He walked in the fields, planting yams. He carried water from the river for elderly women. He helped build houses for families who had lost theirs. At first, it was just for survival, but soon something strange happened. For the first time, he felt peace, not power, not fear, just simple peace. One day, as he helped a farmer harvest maize, the man patted him on the back and said, "You are a good worker, stranger." Jago flinched. He had never been called good before. Maybe he could change. Months passed. Jagun had become strong again, not as a king, but as a man who worked with his hands. But the guilt never left him. One day he made a decision. He would return to Odon, not as a ruler, not as a beggar, but as a man who had wronged his people and wanted to make things right. When he arrived at the village, people recognized him instantly. Shouts of anger filled the air. The wicked king has returned. He has come back to take the throne. Chase him away. Jagun raised his hand. I do not want the throne, he said, his voice clear. I only want to make amends. Silence fell over the crowd. The people of Odon had never known King Jagun to ask for anything before. A familiar voice rose above the murmurs. Let him speak. The crowd parted and the old woman stepped forward. Jagun knelt before her. I was a cruel king, he said. I brought suffering to this land. I do not ask for your forgiveness, for I do not deserve it. But let me serve. Let me give back what I took. The people stared, uncertain. The old woman nodded and said, then serve. And so the former king became a servant to his own people. Jagun worked alongside the people of Odon, helping rebuild the homes he had once destroyed. He tended to the sick, planted crops, and protected the people from raiders. Slowly, the people began to trust him, but not all. One night, a man named Bala, whose father had died in Jagun's prison, stepped forward with a knife. I should end your life, Bala growled, holding the blade to Jagun's throat. You made us suffer. You did not deserve to live. Jagun did not flinch. Then do it, he said. I took from you. If this is my punishment, I will not fight. Bala's hand trembled. His breath came fast. But then he saw something he had never seen in Jagun's eyes before. Remorse. Slowly, Bala lowered the knife. Killing you won't change the past, he said, but maybe you can change the future. For the first time, Jagun felt a weight lift from his chest. Maybe there was hope after all. One morning, the village elders called a gathering. The people had seen Jagun's change. They had seen his humility, his hard work, his regrets. The elders spoke. Odon needs a new ruler, one who has seen both power and suffering, one who understands justice. The people murmured in agreement. Then the old woman stepped forward. We ask you, Jagun, will you rule again? Jagun's heart pounded. He had once ruled with fear. Now he had a chance to rule with wisdom. He looked at the people, the same ones whom he had once terrorized. Then he knelt before them. I do not deserve to be your king, he said, but if you will have me, I will serve you, not as a ruler, but as your protector. And so King Jagun was crowned again, not as a tyrant, but as a king. Years passed, and Odon became a kingdom of peace. And at the heart of it was a king who had once been cruel, but had learned the greatest lesson of all time. True power is not in fear, it is in kindness, in justice, and in the willingness to change.